Hey, welcome to another episode of Clear Lake Connections, where we talk to the people behind the businesses of Bay Area Houston, proudly sponsored by UTMB Health. Today's guest, it's a particular topic of interest right now. We're going through an incredible heat wave. Dr. Nadim Islam, and you are an emergency room physician, and you are going to talk to us about the dangers of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So first of all, define those two things. I think people probably need to know what the thresholds are and kind of what they mean.
Sure. Heat emergencies come from mild, moderate, and severe. So patients that have mild symptoms, they could have a rash, they might get some cramps, you might have something called heat syncope. Moderate symptoms is what we would call heat exhaustion. And those symptoms are more severe. They may have a headache, they may have vomiting, lightheaded, tachycardic, or heart's going fast. They may be sweating profusely. And then the severe is heat stroke. And that's defined as a temperature greater than 40 degrees or 104, along with changes in mental status.
And that's your core temperature, right?
That's your core temperature.
Yeah. Yeah. So the heat's been on, and I don't think people realize how many people a year die from heat-related problems. And it's even worse in places where they're not used to heat. I mean, at least we're used to heat, but I know I've been to Europe some years, and a heat wave comes across, and you hear about hundreds of people dying. What are the big symptoms people need to be looking out for?
So really the first thing is looking at risk factors. So if you're on certain medications that kind of prone you towards heat problems, things like Benadryl and other medications, then it's also like your environment. So if you're going to be out in the heat for a while, the symptoms that they often get would be could be something as light as like a headache, and then nausea, vomiting. They also can get more and more severe to a point of where they start getting confused, and then they change their mental status. They could have seizures. So there's a whole continuum, but the first steps, the first symptoms, I'm sure we've all experienced it to some extent, is feeling just lightheaded and thirsty and sweating profusely.
And so if it's at that stage, what can you do to prevent like an ER visit?
So really just three simple things. Number one, drink water. Number two, like get in the shade, and then besides drinking water and getting in the shade, I would say it's really important to kind of get somewhere, where they can get really cool down and get in ACs and things of that nature.
So I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, that's why I'm going to ask you, is if you get heat stroke or heat exhaustion, you become exponentially more susceptible to it in the future.
Yes. So, military recruits, things of that nature. That's why it's one of the questions. And the camps, we always try to identify people that have had previous heat issues because they're more vulnerable to it in the future. So often, we do Boy Scout camps or military. You'll know which of them have had previous problems with the heat. And often they're the ones you really have to look out for and make sure they're drinking, make sure that they're having proper rest cycles, things of that nature. So
medically, do we know why they're more susceptible? It seems kind of strange. It's not a disease. It's, so do they know why it makes you more susceptible down the road?
I think it's a combination of many things. So some of them might be things that you can control, like things like obesity, things like medical issues, like people who take certain medications and have a certain predisposition because of things they have some control of. And there's other things that are more in the molecular level that we may not fully understand.
Yeah, because I've actually seen somebody have a heat emergency. I used to play soccer in the summers, and I was an older guy, probably a little overweight, and this guy was out of college, looked like, the perfect athlete. And during the middle of the game, he fell over and was, basically shaking. And I quit after that because I thought if it happened to him, there's no way I can do that. But it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around that somebody in that good a shape had this heat episode, and then now forever they're more susceptible. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, like we talked about, there's like the two types of things. One is people that are just vulnerable, and they may just be the elderly and the young, or they may have socioeconomic problems. And then there's people that are getting it from exertion. So it's often athletes that are playing in 100-degree weather, or firefighters that are fully in uniform fighting a fire, or maybe they're doing some sort of training that's extremely strenuous. So I'll often see, that category, both of the categories in the emergency department that are suffering from heat illnesses.
Well, and with the kind of record-breaking heat that we've been having, have you seen an increase?
I have. Definitely. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that have different social issues leading to their electricity being cut. I mean, along with these record heat means record electricity prices, and not everyone's able to keep up with it. So, yes, we definitely have been seeing it. I also work with scouts a lot, and the majority of the kids that will come to our aid station, it's because of heat. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not feeling good. I'm vomiting. I'm having a headache," and inevitably we just sit them down, have them drink water, put some ice on them, and half an hour, 45 minutes later, they're ready to go back out.
Yeah. And so with these 100-degree temperatures and all these heat advisories, if you're in a vulnerable group, it's best to stay inside. But if you can't stay inside and your work takes you outside, what are things we should be doing to protect ourselves other than the obvious?
Yeah, I mean, really, most of the stuff is obvious, just people don't do it. So first of all, they need to hydrate themselves. So you should be constantly drinking water, preferably with some sort of electrolytes. You should be resting. So if you look at if you're working in direct sunlight and it's hot outside, most of the schematics are such that you only work for 15 minutes and you rest for 45. So they have these charts that kind of has to do with how hot it is, or what the heat index, or what the wet bulb temperature is, and based on that, there are different work and rest cycles. So obviously, drinking, staying in the shade, resting, if possible, resting in a cool environment before you have to go back out again and do your work.
So are you seeing this a lot in kids these days, or is it just across the board? It's adults, it's the elderly? Really,
it's the kind of vulnerable. So you'll see it in the elderly, and then you'll see it in the very young kids. And then you also see it in kind of patients that are homeless or psychiatric, things of that nature. So they're always outside, and so they're much more vulnerable to this.
And what's the typical treatment for especially heat stroke? Because by the time it gets to that's pretty dangerous.
So by the time they come to us in heat stroke, that's a medical emergency. So often they'll come in. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take off all their clothes, and then we are going to try to decrease their temperature as quickly as possible. So heat stroke is defined as greater than 104. So we're trying to get them down to like 101 as quickly as possible. So if we have the ability to put them in an ice bath, we will. If not, what we'll do is we'll get a fan and we'll have ice cold water and we'll spray it on them as the fan is going on them. We'll get ice packs and put it on different parts of the body, like their axilla and their groin areas. We'll get wet sheets that in cold water and put it on them, and as the fan's kind of going across them. We'll give them IV fluids that will have, they'll be cooled IV fluids. And then those are kind of our mainstay type items, is really to utilize cooling as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because at that point, hydration's not the issue. It's the core temperature.
Yeah, and with all the hydration at that point, they're usually too out of it to drink at that point. They're confused. They're throwing up. So you really can't drink or hydrate them orally anymore. So we're hydrating them through their IVs.
Yeah, probably why if you do yard work, coming in, taking a cold shower kind of does the same thing.
Absolutely.
And it's why it feels so good, because your core temperature gets up so high.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to tell us to be on the lookout for, or any other words of wisdom on this issue, especially given that there's no relief in sight when it comes to the weathermen these days?
Yeah, I think that, as the heat is continuing, I think, it's not going to be letting up anytime soon. just sticking with the basics and planning. As Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, right? So just kind of being proactive about it. If you're gonna be out, making sure that you have the drinks and the water as you're going out there. Make sure that you have a shade. You've got hats. You're using sunblock. And then making sure that you listen to your body. As you need rest, go into the areas and get the rest, and not just kind of trying to power through it. We're going to have football season coming up, and these young boys are going to be out there with their practices. So it's really important that they acclimate to this weather before it starts, because if they haven't all summer been in the heat and now all of a sudden they're trying to do it with pads and a helmet, it's going to be we will see some of those.
So you can build up a bit of a tolerance.
Absolutely. Your body can become more efficient in managing the heat.
Okay.
So people who often work on the heat are able to manage more heat than people who are always indoors. So football players, people who are going to have to work in the gardens, work outside, you just have to build it up. The first day you should just take it very mild and give yourself about 2 weeks to really build up some tolerance.
Yeah. And you said, obviously, listen to your body. But it's also important, like you said, in the football setting or what, keep an eye on each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you get to a point you don't, you can't listen to your body anymore because you get.
Yeah, these boys are so excited, or that they just want to power through. They don't want to be a wimp.
Yeah.
So it's important that we have rules in place to make sure that they're hydrating and keeping safe.
Yeah. And it's not just the football players, it's the band, because they're wearing those uniforms.
Oh, absolutely.
And they drop like flies out there sometimes. So, well, thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.